Hello and welcome to The Big Picture with me, Ishan Russell. Tonight our focus is on the expectations and efforts in the World Trade Organization Ministerial in Nairobi, Kenya. Now, coming on the back of the climate change accord, there is hope for pushing multilateralism in trade as well. But given where countries stand right now, compromise looks rather difficult. While the developing countries push for the continuation of the Doha development agenda, developed countries want something different, including greater agricultural market access. Now, for India, there are quite a few battles at this ministerial, from production subsidies to farmers to investment and capital flows. A lot will be at stake. So what can we really expect from the WTO ministerial in Nairobi? Tonight, I'm joined by Dr. Dinesh Abrol, Professor, Institute for Studies in Industrial Development, Dr. Praveen, Professor at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning at JNU. We'll also be joined by other guests as the show progresses. But just to start off, because for our viewers, as far as this subject itself is concerned, we'll be using a lot of terms and talking about a lot of things. So just for that understanding, the Doha development agenda, now that is something, Dr. Abrol, that the developing countries are saying should be the basis for the conversation over here. The developed countries want it dead. Why is that so?
No, as far as this agenda was concerned, it was worked out jointly, both by the developed world and developing world. Though, in fact, at the time when the Doha Development Agenda in 2001 was agreed to, there were settled concerns which were not taken on board by the developed world. But finally, whatever the statement was, the agenda, which included a number of issues, agriculture included, where the green subsidies, green box subsidies were also to be looked into, amber box, blue box subsidies to be looked into, subsidies which are given by the US and the EU to their own farmers, they were to be reduced and so on, etc. That was one of the key points there. And that was the development dimension also. And there were also issues with regard to similarly, patents and where, again, the question was that developing countries' traditional knowledge has been also, pirated in terms of patenting and so on, etc., of various kinds of neem, turmeric, and you have heard about all those stories. So we've been wanting that certain kind of safeguards which we have worked out in our act, for example, disclosure of source of origin of biological materials, or the Convention on Biological Diversity, should be actually, brought, trips and should be really aligned as far as it's concerned, so that we can get also our due with regard to our biodiversity, which is our intellectual property. Similarly, there were issues in other areas like in services also, where our concerns were expressed. But now these issues are of no interest. They are saying that the world has changed. You are a rising power. You are an emerging economy. And as a result, we don't want to discuss any more those particular issues. And we want market access, and you can benefit out of that because the global value chains have emerged and so on, etc. And this is the way forward as far as is concerned. Michael Froman, like yesterday, wrote in the Financial Times this particular thing, that Doha is dead. The language that they're using.
Yeah, that's why I said they're saying Doha is dead. And I want to get in Dr. Jha on also this. That Dr. Jha, the fact that, the goalposts seem to be changing every ministerial. Every time there is a meeting of the WTO or related organizations, the goalposts seem to be changing every time, don't they?
Exactly. In fact, that the developed countries have been trying to do that right since WTO 94-95 onwards. At some point, there was substantial resistance built by the developing countries, and the Doha round was in some sense the high point, the culmination of it, but then it has just got stuck after that. As you said, in the subsequent rounds, there has been an attempt to essentially include things which are more favorable to the developed countries and become more and more belligerent with respect to things which could be potentially in favor of developing countries. Now, in such a situation, I doubt very much whether much can be gained in the 3 days starting today in Kenya, Nairobi, right? So it is a very, very, in some sense, in terms of some basic ethics of negotiations, it's quite clear that you can't have something like that, keep shifting the goalposts and so on. So fundamentally incorrect, right?
All right.
And in particular, two issues where things have sort of fundamentally stuck for a while, and now in this round they're going to add many more things. As Dinesh pointed out, this whole question of subsidies the way the agriculture has to be treated in the context of developed countries is very different from the way it gets treated in developing countries in a whole critical sort of manner, including, for instance, not only trade, but in terms of whether you can provide adequate support in terms of food security, etc. Right? I mean, the whole question of subsidy, as you know, I mean, on an average, the subsidy on one European cow is actually more than what the average income of an Indian farmer is.
Oh, wow.
Right? So we are talking about very dramatic numbers.
Okay.
Okay. And then, you know, this whole business of insistence on including non-agricultural market access, trying to widen, broaden that, etc. We know, basically, they are insisting on reducing tariffs in a whole range of areas. Now, we know what has happened to a whole range of activities in the developing world. India is supposed to be one of the better off countries.
Right.
But just see what happened to our electronic sector.
No, and that is something
actually been wiped out.
Where it's being, I mean, India is being targeted along with China, that you're not even a developing country anymore. I want to put that question to Ganapathy Subramaniam, Chief of Bureau of Puthiya Thalaimurai, who joins us on the phone line. Thank you very much for coming in on the phone line. You've unfortunately not been able to make it to our studio right now, Ganapathy. But just for our understanding, for India, these negotiations are extremely critical because India, it seems, is being singled out as a country that really is going against the spirit of the WTO on a host of issues. Do you think that's a big challenge for India at this ministerial?
Well, if India is growing at 7.5% or 7%, it is not the mistake of India. It is the other economies of the world which are not growing. The US is still looking at green sheets only, and the European Union is still looking at negative growth. In this kind of a situation, what is the mistake of India if India is growing at 7.5% and if India is a major economy? What the European countries and America are trying to do are that as follows. One, attack agriculture, like whatever benefits that are to accrue to Indian farmers and also to the Indian poor, that they are trying to stifle for the growth of their own agriculture, which is highly subsidized. Secondly, why should market access not be given in services? Why are they focusing only on trade facilitation, only on capping subsidies and opening up markets? In goods, what about services? India will get advantage if our professionals get access to markets of the world for, say, professionals like engineers, doctors, accountants, lawyers, etc. That is one thing I think which India should insist on. At the same time, safeguarding the special safeguard mechanism that India needs, because India has billions of farmers who are living in such poor conditions, and they need to be given minimum support price, and government has to maintain buffer stock for that purpose. Right. At the same time, the buffer stock also helps in feeding the poor, giving them subsidized food grains. This is not a luxury. This is the basic necessity of life. So therefore, European countries and the US should give up all the talk about opening up the market and free market and look at the development round. Doha development round was what they talked about, and now they have totally dropping it out and looking at only issues like trade
facilitation. It's quite a U-turn. It's quite a U-turn, and Dr. Abrol, you pointed to it in the first place. So I'll come back to you on this point that India is being isolated, it seems, at these ministerials. They're saying that India, you're not even a developing country anymore. It's come to the talking table on completely different terms. How does India tackle this? What do you think is the approach that India is going in with this ministerial?
See, there's nothing new in this charge that you are obstructionist, you are isolated, and as a result, you need to sort of fall in line with what the developed world wants as far as is concerned. This happened at the Singapore, but we stood firm at that time. That was in Singapore ministerial, which was the first immediate ministerial after the Uruguay round. New issues were brought in, investment was brought in, government procurement was brought in, environment was brought in, labor was brought in. All these issues were brought in at that time. India stood firm at that time. And as a result, they had to drop those issues. Right. Remember that. So I think India, China, Brazil, all these countries are huge markets as far as is concerned from their standpoint. So let's not underestimate our bargaining power as well. As far as that's one concern. That whether India actually is aware of its potential, whether India actually realizes what its potential is and what its bargaining power is. Now, as a result, for very small gains, you may actually decide to give in, because when such charges are made. Let me make a point with regard to what Ganapathy is saying. Let's say with regard to Mode 4, that he's talking of, that our doctors, engineers, etc., they should have openings, and that's what we should try to get it. I'm sorry, I have to disagree with this particular point of view, because skilled manpower anyway is needed by them. If they want in Silicon Valley engineers, they will actually allow. If they want, and India has talent which is cheap and very quality talent as far as it's concerned. Same thing is about doctors. Same thing is about nurses. I don't think we really need to get, and we are, anyway, our unskilled labor or our other labor is not going to get any advantage through this particular Mode 4 as far as it's concerned. We have seen it in the past. In fact, the kind of laws that they are bringing in these particular countries, they're putting in restrictions for all the migrants who are going to Europe or to United States. You've seen it in the case of what happened with the Middle East people as far as it's concerned. Those people who go and work are unskilled people, are not necessarily skilled people as far as concerned. So I don't think we should be opening our education. Education is an instrument for nation building. Education is an instrument. And if you see the past record of the FDI in education as far as it's concerned, it's pathetic. I can tell you that. In fact, the courses which they have started, in fact, are in hotel, catering, management, and as if you think that we can't build this education system in such areas as far as it's concerned. In areas where we would actually like, in fact, even support from the foreign institutions, that we can work out through the cooperation mechanism. JNU, of which we are both part, has such cooperation with several institutions. I don't think Ganapathy is right that this is the area which we should be focusing on.
Okay, Ganapathy, you would want to respond to that before we move on to the next issue?
Yeah. I was actually talking from the other side, not about our giving access to service providers from the other countries, but unlimited access for our professionals in other countries like the US. For example, what our other panelists is right in saying that if they want skilled professionals, they will allow. But it is at their own sweet will. When they want, they allow. When they don't want, they stop. Why are there restrictions on visa, H-1B visa for Indian professionals? Those kind of restrictions should go. So then Indian firms will be able to eliminate uncertainty and gain more market access in those markets. That is one thing. Secondly, while we should talk only about subsidies and free markets, keeping one thing aside, trade facilitation is important for them. But at the same time, we should also focus on things which are important for them. What about the special safeguard mechanism?
Yeah, I was just about to come to that the special safeguards mechanism.
Exactly.
And Ganapathy, I'll come back to you on this because I wanted to get in Dr. Jha as well. That is one issue, the SSM in agriculture. That is going to be the big contentious issue in this particular round. So for our viewers, help us understand what SSM is in the first place.
You see, I mean, in the Doha round, these countries, developing countries, very strongly argued in favor of two instruments. One is special safeguard mechanisms and the other special products, right? Now, the former was fundamentally used in response to sort of protect our countries from the import surges, right? Now, as we know that in the last 3-4 years, in fact, primary commodity prices have been going down. US, incidentally, there is this Agricultural Act of 2014, which is already in operation, which basically is resulting in giving increased subsidy to the US farmers so that they can compete even more effectively in the developing world. So fundamentally, SSM was viewed as a kind of significant resistance against such fundamentally, what you can consider dumping activities by the first world, right? So that is what SSM is, right? Obviously, the developed countries are hell-bent on making sure that it is weakened. And I'm hopeful that the developing countries together will be hell-bent on ensuring that it is not weakened any further. But it's already, in a sense, I mean, we have already given too much, as Dinesh was mentioning earlier. I mean, we are not able to do anything about many of those subsidies which are part of various boxes and so on.
Right.
Those subsidies, I mean, there's just no way that you can do anything about it. They continue to give it, and we have been trading, and there's very little change in terms of the actual outcomes. So the least that the developing countries can do is to stick to the goalpost, to use the metaphor that you used, right? Whether that will happen, we need to see. It is possible that the developed countries may not insist too much as regards shifting that anymore, because they would want to include a number of new things in the current discussions.
And those new things would be, Dr. Abrol, if I could get you.
I mean, you know, I'll just mention, for instance, trade in services, eliminating tariffs on environmental goods and information technology products. You know, these would be some of the big things, and Dinesh can elaborate. Yeah. Services will be really the big area. Now, here, you know, one thing, I mean, just one last point which I want to mention in this context is that in any case, a number of mega regional deals which are happening, where you are already seeing that all this is happening, you know, TPP, TIPP, etc., etc. So, you know, with reference to that, we know that in any case, there is a massive push in that direction, right? And Dinesh, if you want to elaborate on some of that.
No, I think Praveen has just indicated these two issues correctly, that in the case of, you know, MRS or TTP or TPP, we already see a WTO plus kind of, you know, provisions emerging. Like, for example, take the case of intellectual property rights, for example, where we do not allow, let's say, second uses of the the older molecules as far as is concerned, which means we don't allow continuous monopoly to remain, you know, in the market around same molecules being built, in terms of saying now this is also useful for this particular purpose and so on, etc. Our Indian Patent Act 2005 does not permit that as far as is concerned, but they are brought in these particular agreements. Similarly, with regard to, let's say, that there you can't discuss their subsidies. In any of these particular mega regional or FTAs, they only discuss tariffs as far as they're concerned. Their subsidies are again not going to be untouched. And they want to multilateralize all these particular program advantages which they have got as part of the MRAs and the TTP and TTIP and RCEP, various partnerships which they have built and so on, etc. So this is one. And why they are building it, and I think we need to understand, because the structure of the trade as they have built, you know, basically they extract rents either at the stage when they, through technology, that is, you know, or it is through the marketing and, you know, control over promotion and so on, etc. Take the case of Nike, for example, or, you know, Reebok or shoes, etc. Though they are manufactured in, you know, developing countries, but very little value actually accrues to them. Value is largely captured by the US. Let's say in the case of Nike, more than 50% of the, you know, though the millions of workers may be working in Honduras and some of these countries, but value added might be also there, but value capture is very, very little. Because similarly, in the case of iPhone, you take the case of China, for example, in China, China assembles those particular phones. You know, only 2% of the value is captured by China. So they want to actually retain these advantages which they're built in the GVC, and they are important. Why? How can they get that? That's through trade in services. That's actually through intellectual property rights. This is through investment. Investment we rejected in Singapore, multilateral agreement on investment. The new forms of bilateral investment treaties, FTAs and RTAs, through which the investment pre-establishment as well as post-establishment, they want complete freedom for their capital. No obligation. That's what they want to retain, so that they can continue to extract rents, they can continue to increase their surplus, and as far as even if you have a certain amount of jobs created here, they would be low-wage jobs, there will be informalization of those particular jobs. None of those people would be able to actually get what is known as decent jobs.
Interesting point to make over there, and it completely changes the context then of the conversation that we're going to be having in Nairobi, Kenya. So, Ganapathy, Subramaniam, then what's the point of a multilateral trade organization like the WTO? That begs the question, because if a deal or if a conversation has to happen between two nation states, it'll happen anyhow. And ultimately, as far as trade is concerned, every nation state would be serving its own interest.
Yeah, that's true. See, what we are seeing more and more is that the regional trade agreements are taking away the advantages that one might possibly get through WTO. But at the same time, we need rules-based trading. Otherwise, our trading partners will use their muscle power to arm twist and create trouble for Indian exporters wherever market access continues to be restricted or limited. At the same time, what we should understand and do is that we should have unhindered access. No new restrictions come in the way of Indian exporters of goods and services. That is the only way we can make sure that India does well in economy, which is now getting more and more linked to the international economy.
All right. Final words to you, Dr. Jha. The expectations from this particular minister, they might be really low, but at the end of it, after these 3 days, what can we see as an outcome if you would look into your crystal ball of economics?
You see, of course, it's. I mean, what my sense is that the developed countries are going to push very hard for including these new things. And as Dinesh was saying, if I put it in a graphical terms, fundamentally the global value chains are like U curve, where the both sides of, I mean, if you leave the flat part, the base of it, the rest of it is where they want to capture everything. So in terms of technology, innovations, etc., whatever comes through all that, and all these are part of services. Likewise, marketing, again, which is very much part of services and so on. Those are the areas where they're going to push very hard to. So if they choose not to sort of alienate developing countries with respect to agriculture, etc., there might be something which may be even acceptable to them, provided they succeed in pushing for these new things. So that's my sense. Whether the developing countries are willing to see this with some clarity and resist is the big question.
Yeah, and is that a trade-off that would be valid? I mean, the fact that you let go of agriculture, we don't talk about agriculture and subsidies as the primary issue, and try to focus on new areas, is that the trade-off?
India does want to talk about agriculture. Let's see that. If the minister has given an interview yesterday, day before yesterday, and in both those interviews, it's become very clear that we are going to press for the peace clause, permanent solution. Public stockholding is an important issue for us. But I don't think, because the developing countries actually are accepting us as a valid ally, let me tell you, a trustworthy ally, because we got this peace clause actually in Bali by actually having a bilateral deal with the US. See, if you want to give leadership to the developing countries, they should trust you. And I think India should have actually taken an initiative on agriculture, because agriculture involves heterogeneous interests. There are food importing countries like Egypt, and many of the African countries are food exporting countries, for example, Brazil and so on, etc. And there are countries like India and China where agriculture is actually a source of livelihood. 70% of the people depend. We don't export much as far as concerned. These heterogeneous interests needed to be actually collectively handled by leadership, by actually taking let's say, initiative like agriculture trade initiative for South. Let the South come together. Such a scope is there in the WTO even today. But we didn't use this. When we don't take such initiatives, when we don't harmonize or coordinate with the developing world and go at the last minute saying, we want our stockholding. And that too, stockholding, agreement that which we entered in Bali also had its limits. That it was applicable only to the existing programs as far as concerned. Other developing countries, if they want to apply to other crops, that won't be through. So why should developing countries come together with you? See, I think before even going there, we should have actually had a game plan. And we haven't had that game plan. And I'm not sure we are going to get much out of it. We may give in. That's my fear. And
that's the big worry, that what would India or could possibly compromise on? And with that fear, we'll have to wait and watch as to what happens over the next 3 days. But Dr. Jha, Dr. Abrol and Ganapathy Subramaniam, thank you very much for coming in and helping us understand what could be the possible outcomes of the WTO ministerial conference over there in Nairobi, Kenya. We'll of course keep a watch on that for you and be discussing it once those outcomes are there. Thanks so much for watching for now.